over there.
What's
Got
up?
it.
What's up? Seed Talk, the stuff to make your seeds walk. What's up? It is Seed Talk. We back at you once again. We got some new people. We got some guests coming in. I'm gonna give us some time to get into the comments. You know how we do it on Seed Talk. To tag some people so they can get inside the room. If you're on the broadcast right now, if you're not talking, let's mute our mics real quick. A little production, quality and value. Yeah, man, I'm really interested for this talk. I've been talking about it this week. Um, you know, um, we got to talk about this. You know what I'm saying? Because people were talking about, um, they were talking about, defunding the police, getting rid of the police, and they kind of left teachers off the hook. And I asked the question: are teachers oppressors just like cops or law enforcement? And I think that's a really good question to ask, because I feel like if we study history, we'll find out that this whole thing called white supremacy was pushed in the church, which, got converted into the school system. And they start to run their school systems much like they run their prison industrial systems. And they run them so much aligned and alike that Jawanza Kunjufu, based on the data revealed to us way back in the 80s with his series of books called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, he said that you can determine the population of the prison industrial complex by the illiteracy rate of black boys in fourth grade. And they're still making those predictions based on dropout rates and whatnot, to the point where they call it the school to prison pipeline. Let me hit you with another one that hits home. In a school district that I was, an educator in for 12 years, the Department of Justice hit not only an investigation with the Seattle Police Department, they ran it concurrently with an investigation of the Seattle Public Schools. So that reveals that there is a connection between, law enforcement and how they do their thing, and then how the education system does their thing. Now, let's get even deeper. They got SROs in the school, which is school resource officers, which makes the argument even more, digestible for the people who say, man, are you trying to turn the schools into prisons? Because you got cops in there, they got guns. And I'm probably going to say a lot of things that's going to get people confused tonight. You might think I'm straddling the fence. You might think, like, why is this assistant principal, you know what I'm saying, talking this way, And I'm trying to communicate to you that it's way more complex than you really think it is. So let's start tagging people and whatnot. Let's introduce our panel real quick. We got Bobby, Tank Top Bob, and I give Bobby a hard time a lot, but man, he's gonna be really, really influential and instrumental in this conversation because he works in the criminal law system, as a lawyer and whatnot, as a prosecutor. And then we got Dr. Diamond, she's an educator like myself. And then we got Precious, who used to do some substitute teaching herself. And then we got a new member tonight. We got my man Anthony. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell them what you do, man?
What's happening? My name is Anthony Washington. I've been in education for the last 6 years. I'm an educational consultant, a special education advocate, and a curriculum developer on top of also teaching in the classroom.
Okay.
I'm happy to be here. Very excited.
Yeah. All right. So I'm trying to get Alyssa on, trying to log her in real quick and get her on the show. Thanks for your patience. Let's tag some people and whatnot. Let's just get the conversation started. Let's let Dr. Diamond start. Come on, Trisha. Like, cause you're like
Oh my.
You're like, man, down with the system. You made some points, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
during the week. I was like, dang, you know what I'm saying? And it make us really think if our teachers really bad, you know what I'm saying? What you
And
think?
I think that we concentrate so much on police reform that we neglect to address education reform, because educational reform in the United States is very slow. It does not happen very often. And we neglect to see that more of our people are impacted by the education system technically than the criminal justice system, because the education system, irrespective if you're a good or a bad student, you will still be impacted, and that has lifelong impacts. I think even in terms of my career, I have moved effortlessly from education to detention management, because at one point I worked in adult and juvenile detention. This is from education, and there are so many similarities between the two. And as we're concentrating on education now, I want to back up, because one of the things that in one of my master's thesis that I worked on was Brown versus the Board of Education, that we constantly concentrate on the fact that schools were supposed to be integrated, but another aspect of that was supposed to integrate the teaching core. That actually the exact opposite happened, that the teaching core is less diverse now in terms of having Black and brown educators than it was before. And that has definitely a deleterious impact on students, as well as, it's like what that saying, that it teaches white supremacy without saying a word if the majority of your teachers are white and female. And that has lifelong impacts on all students.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Anthony, I know you in the schools and stuff and whatnot. What do you think, man? You think that teachers are just as bad as cops and doing just as much damage as oppressors as law enforcement officers?
Excuse me. Yeah, I actually do. I actually do. Just a number. Just thinking about what the doctor just said. It was 40,000 Black teachers. So within 10 years of the Brown versus Board of Education, 40,000 Black teachers lost their jobs, right? And so, but back to your question, I do, but I'm gonna twist it a little bit, because one thing that I noticed, when I first got into the school, I'm a renegade. I'm thinking I'm going at everybody, overt racism, yeah. One thing I noticed, you have some really, really well-intentioned teachers, like great teachers, right? Where they're not realizing the lack of accountability that they may have in their classroom, or the lack of expectation for their students based off of their IEP, special education. So, just to twist it a little bit, it's not always the teacher that's kicking the kid out the classroom, right? Because we know that's a problem, right? You're getting kicked out of science classes, getting kicked out of your math classes, you're less likely to graduate, and we know the numbers behind that. But one thing I've noticed just from the school program at the University of Washington, some of the very methods that they teach up at that school, when you're in the field, you're dealing with the middle schoolers or high schoolers, the lack of expectation that some of these teachers have, and the fact that some of these teachers actually think it's a good thing, right? They build these good relationships with these students, and it gives a false sense of reality for the kids. And so it's not always a matter of this overtly racist teacher, kick him out, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's the nice teacher that just doesn't realize, these Black boys especially need accountability and a high expectation. So, yes.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of well-intentioned, people that really like children and like, being teachers, but we know it's the skills. You gotta have the skills. And one thing that I learned, and a lot of people were really surprised, is the fact that I'm Black may or may not give me an advantage. It may or may not. I still have to study my butt off as a Black man at 46 years old, 24 years in the game. Now they say that skill is something that, you know what I'm saying, that you do really well, that comes with the least amount of effort or talent, I should say. So I think I do have a talent, but I constantly have to work at that talent so I won't be mediocre.
Mhm.
Because mediocrity, man, is the cousin to so many, you know what I'm saying, things that are not good for Black people, especially when it comes to education. And so I still got to work hard. And I just want to get, I want to get Precious, and then I want to get Bobby. I'm still trying to get Alyssa here on the broadcast. What you think? Are teachers, just as bad as law enforcement?
I would say they can be. Would I use the paintbrush to paint every single teacher that way? No, because like Mr. Anthony said, there are those who really are good teachers, but they just don't realize that they are teaching that to children. But I will say, but I also say I feel with many teachers, I mean, of course, everybody have different experiences. I think a lot of teachers are mostly middle class white women. So that right there, I feel plays a big role because many of them are not around children of color, let alone Black kids. So their expectations or their views of them is highly distorted. I would even go so far sometimes they can stereotype instead of really learning the child, especially if they come from their neighborhood to come to a school that's more in the urban neighborhoods. So yes, I think absolutely they can very be oppressive, especially if they say things to that child that they probably would not have said to a child that looks like them.
Mhm.
Mm.
So yes, and that type of stuff, say what you want, those children remember that stuff.
What you think, Bobby?
We
You're
can't hear
muted. You're muted, brother.
The same day that I got fired from being a police officer, the exit meeting that I had, the recommendation I got was to become a teacher. So there's that. Secondly, I think education, especially early education, is the stepping stone for our society. So we teach children how to operate in our society through schools. So it only makes sense that we expose Black children to racism intentionally to prepare them for the racism that they're going to face in society. Not because I think it's a good thing, but because I think that that is a part of education. I think that they do that, whether it's conscious or not. I think like my 9-year-old niece, for example, just told me a story yesterday about how she went to ask her teacher for a Band-Aid. And the teacher asked her, why do you need a Band-Aid, et cetera, et cetera? How did you get hurt? The next day, my niece saw a white student ask the teacher for a Band-Aid, and the Band-Aid was handed over immediately, no questions asked. This is a facsimile of what happens to Black women in hospitals, right? So this whole experience of my niece, her pain is different than this white student's pain. Her necessity for care is different than this white student's necessity for care. That lesson, whether it was intentional or not, was learned by my niece in school, not academic, but absolutely a reflection of what happens in society. The same way that our Black boys and girls too, obviously, but in different spades, they in the classroom are taught immediately and understand immediately that the same mistakes that they make will be punished more severely. And then people who have my job as prosecutors 15 years later go ahead and repeat that same lesson for young people who make mistakes. So in that way, like I was saying, whether it's intentional or not, we teach Black children what racism looks like and that they're going to be victims to it from an early age. And that, what is the word? That alienation that occurs early on will crush some people's hopes of joining society in a productive way. And that first time that you find out that you're going to be in trouble perpetually, and I experienced this when I was in police academy, another academic setting, that I was going to be in trouble every day just for being myself. When you experience that, it makes you shut down, it makes you quit, it makes you divest from the experience. I think that's what we also see in terms of the academic outcomes. And so then we lead to the problems that Mr. Washington was talking about, where we have teachers who are saying, our students feel alienated, but that's passive voice because they're not actually saying that they're alienating them. It's those students are alienated somehow. We don't know how, but they feel alienated and they're marginalized, so our expectations are lower. So there is no accountability. The same way that teacher that wouldn't give my niece the Band-Aid, that would have went on if my niece didn't tell her mother and that meeting not already scheduled. But it was because my niece relayed it. And there's so many stories that don't get told like that.
Dang. Wow. So all four of y'all pretty much said that we should pretty much just get rid of teachers then. If we're defunding, I mean, that's what it sounded like. I mean, if that's what it sounded like, if the educational system is perpetuating and sustaining white supremacy and aligning itself and finding all kinds of interconnections and intersections with law enforcement and the prison industrial system, then if we're defunding the police, then we should be defunding education too. You know, I haven't heard anything else other than that. Bobby, I mean, so should we just get rid of?
Well, I think there's two sides to the coin, right? Because even going back historically to the times of segregation, I understand that education for Black people during segregation was different or even better, depending on who you ask. But even going back all the way to Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois arguing with each other, education has always been the greatest tool when it's done right for Black people to elevate socially. So I also think that if you were to remove teachers and remove the instrument that is public education, Black people would also suffer the most. Because if we were to go to a model where everybody was educated by their parents, then the people who had less privilege previous to that, right, would only then propagate less education moving forward. And people who had it would, of course, propagate further education for their children. So in any scenario where you remove the apparatus and Tyler, Black people still lose.
You think that we're going to suffer no matter what?
I think you'll suffer greater with no benefits if there's no public.
So we stuck. We just stuck then.
No, I think you can make improvements.
So you're a reformist. You want to reform the system.
Per usual.
Bobby, I mean, I'm sorry, not Bobby. Anthony, what you was gonna say, brother?
Just looking at the comment from Truth, you know, just thinking about accountability. There was two parts really. One, the criminal justice system and education are connected, right? Again, I was in special education, and I remember had a few students that weren't going home, right? They weren't going home. Their parents were having some issues with just connecting with the students for a couple of different reasons. And I remember, I don't like calling it case manager, right? So I'm their advocate. And the district comes in, you know, they have the family coordinator and all these different people to basically give you resources, right? So this is what you can do if the family's having trouble with the kid. All of them were tied to the sheriff's office. Like every single resource that they gave me, I was asking like, yo, is there anything else, right? And so that right there, like the reliance on the school system, they rely on the criminal justice system when things aren't going well in the household, right? And if things aren't going well in the household, there's usually, you know, a kid may be doing something out in the streets, which puts them in a position to get caught up, right? And so there's a lot of teachers that don't even question that. There's a lot of teachers that sign off on that. They get the parents to sign off on it. And all of a sudden, now you have another young Black boy that's being monitored that may or may not have done anything wrong. And so that was the one part. But back to what Truth was saying, just thinking about the accountability, right? There needs to be somebody within the system, within the district that's actually looking into that type of stuff. You know, what resources do we have for students that are just starting in SPED, that have been in SPED for numerous years, that are in special education, that are about to finish, right? There needs to be a whole revamp of that. So I guess that is kind of reform. And then accountability, as you know, a lot of people don't realize this, and people are always shocked, but special education teachers are actually incentivized. And I don't mean to make it sound bad, but this is another reason why I left the building. We're incentivized to keep kids on their caseloads, right? I've heard teachers talk about making sure that they have IEPs set up before their Christmas check comes, right? So that they can get their
Hold on,
bonus.
explain what an IEP is. Explain that to the people what IEP is.
It's an individual education plan for a student that it, I don't want to get all go down the rabbit hole. But if your kid is deemed someone that may be disruptive for a number of different reasons, they're struggling academically, struggling quote unquote behavior wise, they're usually given an evaluation and placed in special education to help them, right? So you can receive modifications or accommodations. The modifications that you receive, the accommodations that you receive, are basically put in an IEP. So your student, your kid now has a plan for them to get through math class, for them to behave better in their science class or whatever the case may be. And
So you've experienced that teachers get individual incentives for
yeah,
IEPs.
yeah. So
That's
we receive,
but that's if they're working on them like an extended amount of time though.
No. I was actually shocked. And I actually tried to use some of that extra money. I tried to put it back into my classroom because I couldn't believe it. Like, you have some teachers that argue to get more kids placed on their caseload because after a certain point, you actually get bonuses for if you go over your limit, right? And so it's unfortunate because thinking about graduation, thinking about expectations again. If you're on an IEP going into high school, you have modified grades. So, some kids, not everybody, right? Some kids do really well with their IEPs. They're able to manage it. The parents are on it. They have a teacher that's able to identify these things. And over a period of time, they still have an IEP, but they're not really in need of the supports. Then you have other teachers that fully rely on these modifications. So it could be something from 5th grade. Tommy doesn't have to read the whole book or just whatever, right? But by the time you get to high school, what this does is they put you in these classes. Even if you're in your gen ed classes, what they do is they give you a modified grade. It's called a modified grade. If you have a modified grade, the amount of modified grades that you end up having at the end of your school career in high school determines whether or not you receive a regular diploma or a certificate of completion. Right. And if you receive a certificate of completion, it becomes harder to even think about going to college. It actually, employment wise, it becomes difficult. And so you have teachers that don't question this. You can have a student that might show a certain level of intelligence or skill. And there's no sense of let me build this kid up in math, right? So he can be in his gen ed classes. So then we can negotiate, because you end up having to negotiate for a student to actually just receive a regular grade, so that they can then receive a regular, quote unquote, regular diploma, so they can graduate and have a better chance to go on to school. So excuse me.
I appreciate you teaching people on that, and the clarity on that. I'm trying my hardest to try to get the sister in. I can't get to down the bottom of the screen where it actually can click her in. It's like there's not enough room so the cursor can be there. So I'm still trying. But my thing is this, is like, I don't see that we're ready with all the problems that we have with the educational system. I don't see how we're possibly ready to get rid of law enforcement or even, God forbid, the education system. I mean, because the education system we've been conditioned is a form of childcare. It's a form of, we are teaching children the bulk of their social skills that they use, post-secondary, education. They're learning how to navigate the world based on K through 12 for the most part, unless you're a part of that percentage that is dropping out and getting your GED, or you're just not going to school or whatnot, because going to school is, it's the law.
Mm-hmm.
They have something called the Becca Bill. So, and now they've taken SROs, which is school resource officers. They've taken police officers out of the schools. And it's hard to make that adjustment.
Mhm.
And we're conditioned to have law enforcement in the schools, whether you like it or not. I haven't had an experience with any SRO, and maybe I just been blessed in Seattle or in Tacoma, that I felt that haven't been, you know what I'm saying, a good resource for our students. Meaning that it's good that they have an interaction with law enforcement in a safe place so they can know how to navigate this legal world that is going to captivate and is going to wield so much influence over their lives. Like, we don't live in a place where you can just, you know, just go, you know what I'm saying, rebel and, live your sovereign life. So I like the fact that law enforcement is in their schools just to teach people how to navigate the system. And I've seen already, since we come back from the pandemic, that a lot of our students haven't been in school, like our ninth graders, since they were like 11 or 12 years old.
Mhm.
And so they're having a hard time reintroducing themselves. And, things like assaults, fights, bullying, harassment, intimidation, it's really good to have law enforcement in the room, not as intimidation, because that's not how I use them as an educator. I use
Mhm.
them as resources to educate you. If you don't stop doing this, this is what can be the consequences for your action: restraining orders, no contact, anti-harassment documents against you.
Mhm.
Describing and defining what domestic violence is, because um people don't even have a viable definition of what you know um domestic violence is. And statutory rape is something that was really helpful. So I want to know what y'all feedback is on that, like law enforcement being taken out of the schools, and how you see that. um
I
Divinity
completely
said
disagree with
anti-black
literally everything you
students.
just said. So
Would you
I
say
completely
Patricia?
disagree with I completely disagree with what you said in terms of having school resource officers being a positive to a school. Um, even I probably can't name the school district. So at one point, I was
I was
a
talking about the schools I ran.
oh, okay.
I,
Well,
I definitely put that disclaimer out there. I said I've never worked in a school
okay,
where they weren't a resource, because that's how I use them. But go ahead. That's
okay.
why I'm very specific about
They
my personal professional
yeah.
relationships.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, in schools that are elementary schools, so my experience with as an administrator has been in elementary school as well as high school. A school resource officer at an elementary school tackling and interacting with kindergartners and putting handcuffs on kindergartners, that's not a positive learning experience. So I think when school resource officers tend to be in elementary schools, they'll go from 0 to 100 quickly and not realize that this is supposed to be a learning experience for the child. They don't necessarily have like things of like their IEPs they aren't aware of. So they don't know if something's a manifestation of a disability. And yet then they're referring them for what exclusion or having them interact with the criminal justice system in elementary school. So I don't think that's a positive. I think the adult in the room, which is normally the teacher or the teaching assistants, they need to have the skills in order to know how to de-escalate a situation as the adult in the room versus criminalizing kindergartners, first graders, and second graders. That's not the experience that Black children, particularly Black boys, because I've seen Black kindergartners handcuffed. So that's not the experience that they need to have, because that could be a traumatic experience that carries through school, through the educational system for them, just because the fact that they had the misfortune of having a teacher who couldn't de-escalate. I also feel like, with COVID, in terms of revamping the education system, when the pandemic happened, we were able to revamp the system to accommodate this temporary situation. I think that kids K through 12, they don't have time for the adults to continue to wait and find excuses why it can't be revamped. It's more than just about, hiring different teachers. The entire system needs to be revamped, or because I mean, right now, even when you're talking about the kids that aren't in special education, your mastery is really about mastering Europeanness. This educational system was created for the past and not for the present. So everything in terms of like curriculum, the policies and procedures that support white supremacy, all of those things need to be examined and adapted for 2021 and beyond, because the system we have right now is literally for the 20th century. It's not
So
for the
Trish,
20th century.
so Trish, how do we get there? Because you said that, and by the way, I'm not speaking about any, like if I had experiences, I had one situation in high school where a police officer tackled a student when they were fighting, when they wouldn't stop fighting and fighting another person. But this whole thing of law enforcement putting handcuffs and doing stuff to people in elementary school, that's wild. That's unacceptable. That's whack. I have never experienced nothing like that. And I'm glad I haven't, because I would, definitely be protesting and to have something to say. But you say that they need the teacher or the teacher assistant to help, de-escalate and refer to their IEP or their 504 plan, so people aren't being punished for the disability. But then at the same time, you're also saying that teachers aren't the answer either. They ain't got the skills. So what's the answer?
They're part of the puzzle. So one aspect of it is addressing their de-escalation skills and how they interact with students in the classroom. So that's one part. There's another part that addresses the curriculum to ensure that the curriculum is really preparing them for the present and the future, and addressing white supremacy. But even that's a challenge now, because there are teachers that don't want critical race theory and all that. So that's even a challenge. It's multifaceted. So there are several things that need to occur at once. And so one of the aspects is human resources. So the teaching staff, the professional development that they're receiving, that needs to change, as well as the curriculum needs to change.
And how do you think we do that? Changing all those things?
I think, unfortunately, it needs to start with the adults in the room. So it would need to start with the teachers, and looking at where we are, re-envisioning where we recruit teachers from. I know most districts that I've worked in, they've recruited from PWI, so primarily white institutions. They've recruited teachers from there, and they'll place them in school districts with a high percentage of students of color, because, in one aspect, they get their student loans forgiven if they have student loans. And I've coached teachers that were like, I'm not leaving for 5 years because I need my student loans forgiven. So I'm going to stay here for 5 years, regardless of the harm that they're causing kids. So that's one thing that we need to address, try to recruit from more diverse populations. And then to re-examine the curriculum in terms of ensuring that when they are teaching, that it's engaging for the students and respectful of their background, so they can see themselves. If they're not seeing themselves in the classroom in terms of the instructor, that they're seeing themselves in terms of the curriculum.
Alyssa, it says that you're on the broadcast, but it's like you got two screens going on here. So, and now you're not on there anymore.
I would like to add something. I think another reason I think why teachers not held to the same standards of top again removed, because everyone has this. We have been socially conditioned that teachers are always right. I think that's like a bigger thing. The schools don't question it. The principals don't question it. Even some parents don't question teachers' judgment and their evaluation of their students. So I think once you start there, we'll eliminate a lot of stuff, because if you try to go by the word of these teachers, a lot of our children's really going to suffer. I'm seeing now that I'm seeing more parents more involved in their children's education, at least on my end. But other than that, as long as we don't question it, that's exactly what is going to happen. I'm glad I have my mom the way she was, because my second grade teacher assumed I was illiterate because I didn't want to read in class, which was far from the truth. And when we was at teacher parent conference, my mom, I don't know what kind of book my mom had on her, but my mom always had a book on her for some reason. She pulled that book out and I read 2 pages with no stuttering, with perfection. And the teacher said, well, she don't do this in class. And my mom said, maybe because she don't want to.
Yeah. Real quick, Alyssa, I had you on the broadcast. You were up there, and something happens. You keep kicking yourself out, and it takes me forever to get you on the broadcast. When I get you on the broadcast, we got to figure out how to keep you on there. It's like the 3rd time that you've kicked yourself out. I don't know what's happening. I'm not doing it. And now, so my thing is this, is like when we condition a group of people to be dependent on a system, whether it's the law enforcement system or the educational system, and we remove that, it's like removing a crutch for someone and then they fall down. I want to know from like Anthony, or even, saying Trisha or Bobby too, you can chime in, Precious. I want to know, now there's no SROs, because I'm here. I'm not working online. I'm on the front lines. I'm here when these kids are basically telling you to go F yourself. That's real talk. Get away from me, blah, blah, blah. They got a lot of trauma. You're throwing verbal judo at them. You're throwing counselors at them, academic, social-emotional counselors at them. You're throwing restorative justice at them, saying you're not even in trouble. Let's just have a conversation. Nah, man, I'm good. I'm just going to walk around the school and do whatever I want to do. Because they've been conditioned that they're not going to listen until someone with a badge comes in, or a gun, or a uniform. I've even had situations where I've gone above and beyond. They're walking around, they're disrupting the educational process of other students, including themselves. They're being violent. And I say, okay, let's just watch it. Go get on the phone. And I call their parent. I work at a high school. Their parent comes. Their parent calls. They're still not listening. These people are fighting staff members. Kids are fighting parents. Parents are fighting students. What's the answer? Because throwing up, all this data, anecdotal data of like cops are bad and they're handcuffing kindergartners. Okay, help your brother out, because you never know. Logic I'm in might be on the front page or somewhere buried in the obituary of some newspaper, real talk, because I done lost my life thinking I can cure everything with verbal judo and restorative justice. Help me get some answers.
I think those are the kids that need, and unfortunately we don't have enough psychiatrists and mental health providers at schools. That was one of the really good things when I was teaching back in Europe, that we had a school psychiatrist. So, and with smaller classes, kids like that, if maybe, I'm not going to say they definitely had it. They had something like oppositional defiant disorder or severe trauma that they were trying to work through. There was a psychiatrist that they could go and speak to, and the psychiatrist was the one with the huge caseload. They didn't necessarily have special education, and the therapists that were at the school. But unfortunately, I realized when I came back here that we don't have therapists and psychiatrists on staff for a school. I mean, the couple of schools that I was at, they were brick and mortar. We had like one counselor that was shared between 3 or 4 schools that would show up like Thursday between 12:30 and 12:45 for all the kids. So we do, it's multifaceted. Of course, some enforce for extreme purposes, but we really need to have more mental health provisions at schools.
But what do we do
I,
now though? Like, cause like if I call it, like that's not gonna work. It's not like I'm dealing with a student who's running through the hallways,
mhm.
basically literally telling me to F myself, dropping all kinds of, stuff to me. I'm not, it's like I can't call a counselor and say, roll up a couch and let them lay on it in the middle of the hallway. Like we're in crisis. And I
Mhm.
don't want to call the boys on them. I don't want to call the police on them.
Mhm.
So what do we
You-
do? Like, and then the parents, some of the parents, like, they're, you know, they like,
uh,
you said a lot of times that, the parents want to be friends with their children for whatever reason.
Logic.
So it's just like we're not ready. We're not ready to get rid of the mechanisms and the tools that are set up that people are conditioned to respect.
There's a couple things that are being said, and it's tough because just thinking about mental health, right? I've actually had experiences where this is what this kid needs. This is what this kid needs. Blah, blah, I think this will change everything, but then that means you got to talk about what's happening in the home. And that's not going to happen if my kid's not 16, he's not 17. Right. So they even have to wait to even be able to actually get to a point where they can speak their truth. Right. So the dynamics, there's a lot of different dynamics that Logic is talking about. That's why I keep getting caught up. Another reason why I left the classroom, because it has to be a systematic approach. Right? It's tripartite truth. And the comments actually touched on it. Parents, educators, right? Along with this curriculum and the system. If I always point to this, but on my wall, this is it's a crappy version. It's not the PowerPoint version of my master's project, and it's Black Power versus liberalism, right? And so there needs to be a whole flip or at least adoption of ideology that actually embraces these young men, and it's not present. Part of that's because of what's being learned on college campuses, right? One thing that one thing I'm working on actually is being part of connecting with these teachers, not just Black teachers, but all teachers in these programs, and giving them a more honest look at what their actions, what it means when they kick a kid out the classroom, what that actually means. It's not your classroom management needs to get better. That's what it should be, rather than, oh, I have the right to kick these. No, your classroom management needs to get better. And that's not being said at that level, right? And so you'll have one or two classes that talk about, cultural relevance, universal design of learning, all these little fancy terms. Then when you actually implement them, the classroom management comes into play, the implicit bias, or I just call it what it is, the racism comes into play, all these different elements come into play on top of the household, right? Is the parents are also incentivized to keep their kids in special education, right? So some kids, they do have a counselor, might not even be working for him, but I know if he sees this counselor, this show, so there's all these different dynamics, and I think that's what Logic is touching on.
Yeah, because go ahead.
No. I hate to agree with your stance on police, right? Just because I wanted to come back to that. I'm gonna be honest with you. I do not think that police should play any part in trying to break, fights up and all of that type of stuff just because of what can happen, what has happened at certain age levels. At the same time, I think it should be done on a school to school basis, right? Just like Logic, I worked at South Shore and at Garfield. We actually had somebody that he was a Rainier Beach legend. He's a legend on the hoop court. He became an officer to work in the community. I looked up to him, and a couple of my IAs who were also from the neighborhood looked up to him. And it was all about prevention, right? There was times where some of my students were going in the stores, doing things that they were not supposed to do. And we actually, like Logic said, we used him as a resource to get these guys to understand, like, yo, this is anybody but, officer such and such. That could be the end of it, right? And then on top of the record that you have, that could be over for you. And so, if you're able to have a connection, if that officer has a connection to the community, like a real genuine connection to the community, I think that can be positive for older kids, right? As you get older, But I don't agree with having police, interfering with day-to-day type stuff. And it's easy for me to say that, Logic, because I'm 6'10", 280, right? And so
What you trying to say? I can't handle my own?
I'm not saying that, but I remember when I first
started,
when I first started working in the school in special education. The reason I went back for my master's degree was because I was a goon, right? They had these 4 black men. We all happened to be large, and we were expected to go into these classrooms and pull these kids out. And they actually would get upset when we would talk to them. When we hey, come on, bro, and encourage them. Oh, he's gonna be in class the rest of the time. He's good, right? And defining that, explaining that it's not just because you're a black man, right? There's a certain level of compassion, there's a certain level of understanding and skill that goes into it. And you touched on that, Logic. A lot of the times, the districts, and it's not just one district, it's the districts, it's the college. When they see you, it's automatic. Oh, you're going to be great for the kids, without actually taking into account whether or not you're going to be great for the kids. And so,
yeah, that is a very thinly veiled mechanism of what I call soft bigotry or racism, is to put black people in positions that aren't qualified for the job, to perpetuate, you know what I'm saying, white supremacy and perpetuate the status quo. And, that good old boy network of just hiring black people that are just, in the group, in the club, and da-da-da-da, whoop-de-woo. And a lot of black people who work really hard to try to reform, rebel, and revolutionize the system kind of pushed out and seen as troublemakers. And the thing about it is, I'm effective at what I do, but if you talk to a lot of people, in the district, I'm effective, but I'm not liked. I'm not. I'm just gonna be real with you. Parents, students, a lot of colleagues, they don't never say it to my face, very rarely. I think the students and the parents actually the students probably have the most guts in all to tell me to go F off. That's because I'm, holding them accountable to certain, rules and policies, what I'm saying, that's set up by the system. But my thing is this, it's like, I think that each school should have a little bit of sovereignty, and they should be able to manage their own budget. And if they want to take $100,000 per year or $200,000 a year and put it towards, based on their, their clientele and their demographic and their data, they want to put it towards their SRO or put it towards more counselors, then they should be able to choose and have that sovereignty based on the data to put it into whatever resource they want to do it. But this whole thing of removing law enforcement from the schools, and then law enforcement doing these, what I call punctuality protests, where you call them and it's like they take forever to get there. Oh, they're proving a point. It's very effective. It's very effective. Let me tell you why it's effective. We'll just get there when we get there. What are they doing? Well, you said you didn't need us, right? So we'll get there when we get there. I mean, it's almost coming to the point where cats got to start embellishing their 911 calls. That's what you want us to do? Because that's not productive. So I think it's really, really, really reductive to just conflate this like, hey, let's get rid of the police. Teachers are bad. Let's get rid of them too. What are we going to do with all these teachers all these parents and people in the community that depend on us to fix their kids? Logic. They literally say on a regular basis, this is what I pay taxes for. Do your job.
I don't mean to talk over anyone, but I just want to say this one thing that I was stressing to the district. There's a lot of gentlemen that actually had come speak to the kids that were out in the streets, right? They were able to have one dude made everybody do push-ups, right? Tell everybody, hey, get up, everybody do some push-ups, yada yada yada. And everybody, you know, they're trying to prove a point. They're all trying to be strong. Yeah. And he was like, look, if you guys were in prison, y'all would have just got tricked. Y'all just tired of that. Every one of y'all. So the conversations that these gentlemen were able to have were things I couldn't even say as a black man, right? But I'm right. The lack of reliance on black men in the community that aren't in the school, right? That are actually having some of these same experiences. I think we don't even look to them as a source, as a resource. And
I think, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think that's part of the problem too, man. I'm gonna have to push back on that a little bit, man. I think part of the problem is that we think that black men are superheroes and we can solve all the problems. My most valuable resource right now at Lincoln High School is a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of our counselors, because black men collectively have done so much harm that me just standing there and I can have all the goodwill and good intentions in my body, in my soul, and my spirit, that I trigger people just on a visual, because I remind them of someone that has not done them well.
I want to push back on that. Kind of what goes back to what Bobby was saying, and just education, right? So part of black men being in the building is to change that narrative. And the only way you're going to change that narrative,
I agree with that,
right, is seeing them interact with women, seeing them interact with different people, including yourselves, and reacting to some of the things that other men in your life may have reacted negative to. And we've commented on this, and I'm not going to tell the story, but I've noticed that, right, where you initially get this, you get this like, yo, what's up? I'm, okay, cool. And instead of being like, man, what's up, dog? Yeah. Let me back up and give you that respect. Let me give you that respect as a man, right? And over a period of time, they see that different reaction. And they're like, I could go to this dude. You know what I'm saying? You tell them a couple of stories of some of the things that you went through, right, with black men in your lives in an attempt to build that relationship up. Like we know when black men are in students are in the classroom early on, right, in elementary, early childhood. We know that black students are more likely to graduate and go off to college, right? And so I think that has to be part of the socialization. And right now, with 2% of all, classrooms, we only 2%. We're 2% of all classrooms. Black women are around 7%. So I think if you saw black men earlier in your school career and more often in positions of like teachers, not and no, this is no disrespect to instructional assistants, janitors, those that work in the kitchen. It's not a disrespect to them, but actually being the head of the classroom, having an opinion that gets listened to, right? Seeing teachers. And I'll shut about this. But one thing that I noticed that for 2 weeks, and it goes back to what you said, where in some ways they don't look at you as a teacher. Man, this dude got on Jordans on, bro. Man, he got the hat quilted and this and yada yada. He talking just like me, right? It's almost like, oh, whoa. I remember it took me I had to write up on the whiteboard, just like Miss Such and Such. I had to have my slide. That's why I'm really a stickler about my slides. They got to look a certain way. There's a certain professionalism that you have to also bring to the classroom to even legitimize yourself in their eyes.
Oh, I definitely got the professionalism.
Right, and I know, you know what I'm saying? But it's just one of those things where when you're a newer educator, you think I could just rock some J's and I'm good. When in reality, it might take them back, man. My stepdad took my J's, or whatever the case may be.
Or when you're a new black person coming into a system, you think that just because you're black, then you got it. That is not the case, man. And you don't, and then you allow kids to call you uncle, dad. Mm-hmm. You don't set boundaries. Then it gets real gross. Mm-hmm. Real gross. It gets real gross real quick.
That goes back to the Eurocentrism. Like I wouldn't mind. I'm gonna be honest with you, right? You got a code switch. There gotta be I teach my students.
No, I get it.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
but here's the deal. You got a code switch, but you always got to understand that the majority of the population you're dealing with collectively, and I want to get to some other people, are dealing with a European mindset. So you have to use the mechanisms and the tool what's in this system that actually conditioned them to get them out of the conditioning, to set them up for a new set of learning objectives. That's why I think that we need to use the tools at our disposal and gradually transition and pivot into something that's revolutionary. But we have to wean our people off this drug called white supremacy. A lot of our people cannot afford to go cold turkey.
Early
Because
childhood,
cold
no.
turkey, because cold turkey in a Eurocentric punitive consequence system means we are going to apply pressure and pain until you comply. And I cannot tell you how many kids don't listen until you raise their voice. That's a gateway to violence because that's what they're getting at home. Oh, send them home. How many times have you heard, send them home, I got something that you can't do at school? How many times have you heard, oh, I give you permission to punch my child in the chest? I done got it a lot of times.
Me too.
A lot. But Bobby, I know you want to probably say something, and then Trisha and Precious, I know you want to say something too, but go ahead.
I think I'm just perplexed a bit. Like there's so much conflicting messaging happening. Like one theme so far has been raising the expectations for our children. But then at the same time, if you do that, then you're not taking into account what some students need who do have trauma, etc. So if you raise the bar too high and you don't take into account people's special situations, then you're setting them up for failure. But then if you have the bar too low, then you're setting low expectations. I think that's something that we have to find balance on. Similarly, I think your point about security in school, it almost runs the same way. So we want accountability for teachers. We also want to teach people in our community accountability, but we don't want to do it with the police. But we also don't want to expose our instructors to undue risk. And frankly, you shouldn't have to be 6'10", 280 to be safe as a teacher in a classroom, right? So there's that too. So I think that the biggest problem that I've seen so far in our discussion, at least for me, is that we have a lot of ideas, but everything feels like it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what the goal is or exactly how to execute it. And I understand that that's never a good reason not to progress. But obviously, we're just speaking in generalities, and nobody's been able to answer the question specifically of what is the action item to fix all of the different problems that we've had. And I understand, like Trisha was saying, ultimately we have a budget issue with our schools, and she pointed out like some schools are funded better than others, and those schools typically also perform better, right? And then someone will say, yeah, but those students are white or Asian or whatever. And then you say, well, it's really not shocking because that aligns with privilege. So performance and privilege seem to have a relationship, right? And the performance and privilege relationship kind of brings me to my ultimate point, which is that I think there's a lot of pressure in schools now, and I can't speak to whether this existed earlier, but there's a lot of pressure on schools to essentially replace the parents in homes with this trauma. And I don't even know if that expectation is realistic, because what you're asking for in a lot of circumstances is for the one teacher in the classroom to prioritize one person or two people who are really struggling at the cost of the other 28. And maybe that's a discussion that Trisha wants to talk about, because maybe 28 other people is too much. Maybe if there was 10, that would be more reasonable for you to pay that attention. But frankly, like for me personally, I don't know that I could rationalize using utilitarian calculus doing all of that for those two students at the cost of not preparing the other 28, especially if they're black. Especially if they're black. So that's really good.
Wait, hold on, Anthony. Let me have Trisha respond to what Bobby just now said.
I agree in terms of class size in the United States. I went from, like I said, in the Netherlands at the equivalent of high school, a big class had 16 students. I came back to the US, and this is another problem. When the few Black teachers that schools do have, they tend to think that we can solve everything. I'm originally a STEM instructor, multilingual, IB program. When I first came back to the States and I'm the Black teacher at the school, they filled my like calculus class with special education students. I had more than everyone else. And when I went to the schedule makers, why do I have all these students? Oh, you're a Black teacher, so we thought you can handle it. You have an affinity to the kids. I'm like, I don't have a special education background, so why would you put like 20 special ed kids in my class? This is my first year back in the US. Well, it was like, you're Black, you can handle it. There's not enough support for the Black educators that we do have. The attrition rate you don't want to know, because those educators are also functioning within a racist system and are experiencing things that maybe they're just able to share with one another, and other challenges. But yeah, like Bobby was saying, it is multifaceted. There are too many students in the classrooms. Also, just because you have trauma does not mean you can't learn. You learn in a different way. You can still have expectations for people. And even as someone, who was in like honors programs and things as a student myself, I knew when I had a white teacher that was just placating me. And you start to internalize that maybe I'm not. Maybe they're just giving me an A because they're like, oh, for a Black person, you're doing well. Then you start to internalize that and doubt yourself. And then, so, within this racist system, it impacts all the students, the ones that are questioning themselves, as well as the students that are in special education, that they're like, oh, well, that's good enough for them. I don't have to expect or push people. But I really want people to remember that just because a student has experienced trauma doesn't mean they're incapable of learning. They learn a different way, and the instructor needs to incorporate their learning style in order to ensure their learning, but just don't give up on all expectations for them.
Right. You're right. And I'm gonna go to Anthony, and I want to go to Precious because I know she ain't spoken a while, but that's totally true, Dr. Diamond. That just because people experience trauma does not mean that they don't learn. They just learn a unique way. And we also have to understand that when we know that we are dealing with people that have trauma and they have triggers, it's totally irresponsible as an educator not to have a plan of what to do with them and how to deal with them to keep everyone safe. Totally irresponsible. So that actually means you have to go against some principles that you would actually set for yourself and your family, like medication. You know what I'm saying? If you know that medication has been prescribed to this person and it's going to get them to the next level to be safe in the school, I think it's irresponsible to try to persuade, someone. If you don't have a plan, if you don't have any kind of behavior modifications, and you're not a behavior specialist and man, I'm telling you, man, I deal with kids who are diagnosed as schizophrenic at 16 years old who have verbal and audio hallucinations. What do I look like as a responsible educator talking about, hey, man, don't take your medication. That's Eurocentric stuff. They drugging you up. And I don't even have a plan. And now he's hearing voices, and the voices told him to go strangle somebody. Now, y'all think it's funny, but this ain't a stand-up special. This is what I go through on a daily. So when we talking about people who don't know how to respond to their triggers and their trauma unless it's medication or some form of pain compliance or law enforcement, job becomes real dangerous. And my only tool, my tool is getting less and less. Now I really ain't even got a pen now because they want you to use restorative justice. So when a kid or a child is abusing drugs or alcohol on campus, it's like, okay, send them home, tell them to come back the next day, hook them up with some drug and alcohol resources so they can get an assessment. But we're not supposed to be suspending people, you know what I'm saying, for even, being under the influence. I mean, we have to take the necessary steps to intervention, and I'm good with that because I study and I nerd out on this stuff. But I wonder and I'm concerned about people who don't nerd out on it and don't once you take away suspension and getting them out of that school setting when they're unsafe for other kids, they have no other plan other than call the police or suspend them.
Yeah.
So I'm just really concerned when we start taking these resources and these tools and these mechanisms that people are conditioned to respond correctly to. I'm really concerned when we take that away, what's going to happen next? Because you know what parents are going to start to say? The same parents that says, why'd you call the police on my child? You should have been using your verbal judo and your restorative justice. Let you not call the police and do something to someone's child. That child goes hurt someone else's child. They're going to come in and say, man, what the hell is your problem, dude? Why didn't you even call the police? Oh, I was trying to do this verbal judo with him real quick. I was trying to tell him to breathe.
That's tough, man.
Go into downward dog and do some yoga and some breathing.
Man,
bro, get this guy out of here. Where's the board?
That's tough, Logic. Thinking
That's
back
my life, though.
Thinking back to what Bobby was talking about, it was two things, and one actually touched on what you just said. So being a special education teacher, right, and wanting to go into special education, it's like you nerding out, learning more about ADHD, learning more about different drugs, seeing the impact of certain drugs on students, setting up my classroom for a student that may not take their medicine to actually be more successful, right? Then when they do take their medicine, then having a conversation about adjusting those levels rather than saying get rid of it. Maybe it's just maybe you need a little bit of this, right? But not to the point where you're a zombie, right? So just kind of thinking about that. I've actually, when you're in it, you're in school, bro, we're gonna do this and blah blah blah, and then you're in the classroom, like, oh, well, we're gonna do this, but he needs to learn how to read first before I could put him in a gen ed class, or he needs to learn how to.
You got to teach him skills.
I fully agree with that, but the techniques, the things that are utilized in order to get to a student to that place, it goes back to what Bobby was saying, is differentiation, right? And so whether it's in my classroom where I have 10 kids, or it's in a classroom with it's an inclusionary classroom where there's gen ed students as well as kids with IEPs, it's all about differentiation, and that's where some of these tools that they do teach you on campus come into play. Right, it takes a lot of work, but mentioning universal design of learning, that is 3 representations. You're making sure every lesson that you teach has representation for every learner in your class. Right, taking it a step further, culturally sustaining pedagogy. You're making sure that everybody is represented within your class. A lot of the times, what I've noticed and what research shows is that the few modifications that you may be making for 1 or 2 students actually end up benefiting everybody in the classroom. And this is actually, there's data to show that on top of data from the last summer that we just had with ACE that shows that. And so it may be something to where a kid doesn't like to read, and so as a result, you got to find a YouTube video that has a certain level of information in it. Everybody's going to benefit from that video in one way, shape, or form. It makes it easier for them. Then you have to figure out ways to still have that rigor, right? And so this is the problem. It comes back to the complacency of teachers and not holding us accountable, not getting paid enough, whatever you want to say. But as a teacher, I thought it was the most disappointing thing in my heart. You're given a book, a curriculum, right? And they say, go off. You might be given a curriculum. I was grateful that I wasn't at Garfield and I was able to build mine based on my students. But that's what it becomes about. Right, that's the role of a special education teacher. If you understand what, and I'll shut up to let Ms. Precious speak. But SDI, right, specially designed instruction. That's the main component of your job. You're supposed to manipulate the system. You're supposed to manipulate the curriculum to benefit the students in your classroom. And again, I don't mean to be a broken record, but a lot of the times when you take those extra steps, it ends up giving you a lesson that's going to benefit everybody else in the classroom. And that's my personal experience. And so that's why I do. I'm an educational consultant. a special education advocate, and a curriculum developer, because you want to hit it from those three aspects in order to create change. Yeah.
Go ahead, Precious. Thank you for that, Anthony.
Yes, y'all made some very, very good points. For one, about the class size, that is a total truth to that, and that's always been my complaint when it came to school system. There'd be way too many kids in one class to expect one teacher to handle. Even if you do have an aide in there to help you, that aide is not in there with you all day. That aide may be there maybe an hour or so, and then they leave for you to leave to pretty much leave you to your own devices to handle the class. I do see it's a big difference in a learning environment too when it comes to less children in class. That's what I have experienced thus far. In terms of law enforcement, I find it very interesting how y'all view that, because when I was in my sub teaching training class, they literally tell us do not try to break up any fights. You
Yeah,
have
it
to
could be
call
dangerous.
somebody to come to assist whatever fight, no matter what. Even if you do think you can break it up, they tell you do not do that, because you don't know if a child will pick up a pencil or a scissor and try to do harm to another student. 'Cause that happened in my junior high while I was teaching. It wasn't my class, but it was classroom next door.
And they
So
don't want you to be liable for hurting a student either, trying to break up a
exactly,
fight.
there is that. They don't want you liable, and if you were to get hurt, the school don't want to be liable for you to get hurt. So that's why a lot of them refrain you from trying to break up fights. Just call the authority. That's what we was trained to do. And another point you made about um, being careful what kind of teachers that people we choose to be teachers to our students. That's another. I hate to say that's another reason why teachers who are not good teachers are still teachers. Because if you do remove them, who you going to replace them with? Because I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't hear people running to be a teacher nowadays, because they look at the school system and be like, hell no, I'm not want to deal with that. Because the school system don't have my back, and the parents are just as crazy as the damn kids. They don't want no parts of it. So when we have that sort of thing going on, I hate to say this, but them bad teachers that we don't feel is doing their job, unfortunately, they're going to stay there unless they really, really do something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
a comment about the medication prescription is why another reason I don't think these teachers should be diagnosing students with any sort of intellectual or mental disorder. I think that's a bad idea. Like saying they
Well,
got
it's usually the school psychiatrist that makes
yeah,
and it's a battery of tests and observations that they use, and they put the data
yeah.
in. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of
It's
times,
supposed to be.
Quote,
what I'm
yeah.
saying is, come on, man, we got to tell the whole story, though, Anthony. Let's keep it 100. Let's keep it a kilo. And Dr. Diamond know too. A lot of these parents are saying, okay, yeah, my kid needs special ed.
He
Give him
bad.
these
He
accommodations.
bad.
Uneducated don't know what it is.
We see a lot of parents
Hey.
doing that because
I've had that
tell-
they
I
want
tell them-
SSI. They want SSI disability for their child.
absolutely,
I
and they
tell-
want accommodations.
I
They,
need an extra $600, $800 a month.
and they want accommodations for their child too. You can't just kick my child out because look,
Oh my
they have a
God.
disability.
That broke my heart, Logic. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. It like I said, I got my master's degree so I could be part of these conversations, so I could run the IEP, I could do the paperwork. I've had parents like, and this is the beginning, right? Where you go in and you think, okay, we're gonna advocate for the kid, and it's the parent. Oh, my kid did. I'm like, no, don't tell. Like, even if that's the case, we need to figure this out. But the minute that you tell them that, that's when all the checks and whatever Mr. Washington talking about doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Let me tell you something else that happens too.
Oh my God.
And this happens way too often. We get our IEP students and our special ed students in post-secondary, life.
Mm-hmm.
I've had them going to retail stores, fast food places, get into an argument, start acting up like they acted up in school. Police come. You can't do anything to me. I have an IEP. What? This is how our people are being conditioned.
Yep, agreed.
You know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm saying that we need a little bit of a balance. You remember back in the day, I grew up in the 70s. Okay. I'm a 70s baby, right? Where now some of y'all might not like this, but hey, look, I'm just telling a story where, we didn't play none of that. Oh, he got a disability. And that's probably the reason why a lot of people with autism and Asperger's and intellectual disabilities, right, or different abilities weren't diagnosed back in the day, because we thought a whooping and some prayer and some good old-fashioned punishment can solve anything. So you couldn't just be like, oh, well, yeah, we had those family members that, we call slow. You know what I'm saying? Oh, leave him alone. He's slow, this, that, and the third. But for the most part, you know what I'm saying? It was like, we taught our children, look, my grandmother used to tell me, I'm going to put hands on you so the police won't have to.
Oh, wait.
So we need to draw that balance where we're educating ourselves as parents.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also teaching them that there has to be a consistent thread where you're respecting authority.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to make you highly competitive in this crass capitalist consumer economy. A lot of our kids don't respect authority.
Logic, man. I gotta push back a little bit, and I don't mean to cut people off, and I do apologize, but I actually embrace my students that think out the box and question authority. Right? Again, it comes back to learning how to communicate.
That's not what I said.
No.
I didn't say don't. I said respect authority.
No.
You can still respect authority by questioning authority.
But questioning authority, right? Like questioning authority in the school system, sometimes, not all the times, can be taken as disrespect, right?
Oh, I don't take it as disrespect.
I know, you don't, right? I don't, but we know that some teachers take that as disrespect, and it's means for getting out my classroom. You know what I'm saying? And so a kid that might be questioning why we're, in physics class, blah, 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 and we're not doing this or yada, yada. I've seen it. I've seen it happen to where it's actually a logical question, but when did you ask that question? Right?
No, I get it. No, I get that. I had to. I'm on the front line, so we had block periods yesterday for an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. Teacher had to, leave for whatever reason. We had to find a sub. We usually get teachers to cover up the classes. It was one of those situations where no other teacher could cover it. I had to go in the classroom, and on 5 minutes on the spot, I had to come up with a lesson plan off the top of my dome for a science class for an hour and a half. Okay. So make a long story short, there was a lot of questioning my authority.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you guys going through this vocab of, what I'm saying, hypothesis and thesis? I'm saying that's a good question, because I want you to be able to tell me how you're going to use this information when you leave out of this classroom. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the disrespect, the questioning. The disrespect was, you know what I'm saying, when I tell you to put your cell phone away, you keep pulling it out. When you leave in class without permission, that's the disrespect that I'm talking about. But I want to go back, and I want to sum it up real quick, because we've been on here for an hour and 17 minutes, and I want to get to the plan of action, and Bobby's getting tired over there. But we didn't talk about this, and we might have to do a part 2. I'm not saying that unions are bad.
Oh, God.
I'm not saying that unions are bad. I respect unions, and there's a purpose for them. But I have not seen situations where unions work to speak on behalf of the children. I see a lot of the unions maintaining mediocrity and supporting bad teaching, supporting teachers that act like law enforcement in their classrooms. I want to say that. And I also want to say this. I agree to a certain degree that class size does matter. I do. But it also matters depending on the skill and the pedagogy of the teacher. Because class size don't matter in church.
Boss.
That pedagogy, that Pentecostal pedagogy that Chris Edmond talks about, Pentecostal pedagogy, you got 60 people in church or more. Okay. Yeah, I know we can't do church pinches, but those people are captivated. Some of them might be sleeping, taking naps. They might be bored, but there's not that much classroom management that has to be done because the pedagogy is there. So I think we can learn a lot about how our children learn best outside of the classroom, in barbershops and churches and beauty salons,
Generalization.
even in freestyle ciphers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But you and Bobby made a good point. That's where different, you have to differentiate your instruction comes in. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of our our students and our teachers don't have those skills. That's why I'm saying we should work within the system to make it mandatory that the professional development, has to be endured to teach a certain demographics of children. But that also comes into, the unions working with us also. You know what I'm saying? And saying that, we're in our right. You know what I'm saying? And our parameters to mandate certain things. It's, COVID is an issue. You know what I'm saying? It's a virus. But I would argue that illiteracy, miseducation is just the deadliest virus as COVID. And if you can mandate a shot, then I think you need to start mandating some professional development too.
Bars.
Or people needs to start losing their jobs. Just like if they don't get vaccinated, if you don't get the professional development, you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And they need to start teaching people, how to teach kids, in a more revolutionary, way, alternative way. I want to get to some of the comments and stuff. And we can finish up with any last thoughts we have before we get to the plan of action. Any last comments? I see Dr. Diamonds over here. She's over there. I know she's about to drop a bomb on us. Go ahead.
No, I was just typing. I mean, also making sure that they're applying the professional development that they receive. Too often.
Exactly.
Instructors, I'll just give an example. In Washington State, you have to have so many professional development hours in order to renew your certification. But I've worked with people that will just take anything and they don't apply anything. It's just that they go and they attend, and they're the first ones to run in to get those clock hour certificates. Mm-hmm. And then you can ask them 2 or 3 days, what did you learn? Oh, I don't know, but I got this certificate. So some way to make sure that they're actually applying any of the professional development that they take, that it's not just to keep their teaching credentials active. You were saying about the unions. Yes, unions don't advocate. Well, I don't know of many cases of unions advocating for their students, like receiving additional funding or resources in the classroom. Conversely, then I think about with charter schools that don't have unions, and that's, I hate to say, even more of a disaster, but yeah, that's also problematic. So both of them, because that's more, sometimes I think about just earning money for students and not necessarily following through on the education of the students. And you can just shuffle from school to school if you don't like the results. So I'm not sure if abolishing unions is actually a good idea either, because they aren't necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea.
Even though
I don't think abolishing anything right now is a good idea until we can figure out, you know what I'm saying, how to stop the bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there needs to be support. I guess I'll go into my plan of action real quick. There needs to be support for community schooling, community education, and community policing. That already needs to get past crawling. It needs to actually be taking baby steps before we say, okay, now we're going to start removing, some of these, vices in the education system. Mm-hmm. Until we can have an alternative education system for our students other than just homeschooling, viable alternatives that are accredited, mm-hmm, or qualified people in there. We're not ready to totally abolish and break down, this system, because for a crass consumer capitalist economy that works you to death, literally works you to death. Mm-hmm. We can't afford to strip our parents away from that resource, because for too many students, it pains me to say this. That's the only kind of consistency and security and a meal, loving, nurturing attention is when they go to school.
Mm-hmm.
That's their only resource they have. And to strip that away from parents when we know that's their most reliable form of childcare, it opens up students to so many different kinds of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I know the schools ain't doing the best job they can do, but it's better than that aunt or uncle who be doing just straight up nefarious stuff around these babies. It really does. I mean, just imagine who takes care of some of these children when they get suspended from school,
Mm-hmm.
if they're not taking care of themselves.
You
With
saw
no
it during
food.
COVID.
Exactly.
No, I ain't going front.
That's why children start acting up right before the breaks,
Yeah.
because they start going through withdrawal. Oh, shucks, here come winter break. Dang, I ain't gonna be in school for 2 weeks. I ain't gonna get no attention. I gotta go home. Mom and dad be fighting. There's domestic violence. There's drug use. I'm seeing people pimping. I'm seeing people.
All types
These
of
are the
stuff.
stories I hear.
Taking care of the kids.
Exactly.
All of that. No, all of that.
Kids
No.
come to school so they don't have to take care of their younger siblings.
Agree. Yeah.
Some people, and listen, and if it's done positively, I'm not saying don't help your family, but we have to really critique the system that works us to death. We got kids skipping school to help help their parents at work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have to start creating alternative systems on Saturday, like Saturday school. I know that's one of the things that we work with brothers and sisters in the CD years ago. We tried to start a Saturday school. A lot of immigrant communities have Saturday schools where they, teach
Mm-hmm.
and speak their native language and customs, and stuff like that. We need to create rites of passage that create value systems.
I don't want to. I mean, so another reason I left Garfield was to be more in the community. So through the business I started, which is in the process of being part nonprofit, and for profit, along with the community organization that I work for, ACE Academy. We started a Saturday program last year. It's gonna be it's coming back next year, January. So it'll go to the end of the school year. That's for 9th and 11th graders. And then we're Lake Washington School District. I know it's on the east side, but you got a lot of Black and brown brothers over there that need that attention. So we're in there and we utilize a curriculum that's Afrocentric. It's kind of, I don't want to say I built it, but it's essentially built off of Dr. Amos Wilson, Booker T. The numerous,
Rest in peace.
right? Yes, numerous. But yeah, so it's baby steps, like you said, and you get all these ideas, and you're doing these different things. You want to expand on it, and then you realize, like, man, like we don't got the money to expand more, or the community's not getting behind it in the way that we want, or you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of different elements, but from my experience, I'm seeing some of it done. We're trying to get in more schools. We're actually trying to get to the point where once we have this social emotional learning curriculum all the way developed, the goal for me is to take what they actually do in schools right now in social and emotional learning, which is disproportionately Black males, and utilize this new curriculum that we have that actually thinks about the real world at the same time as they're thinking about in the classroom, and kind of functioning on a daily basis, as well as thinking about their career, thinking about some of the next steps in their lives. So there's work being done, but like you said, it's baby steps right now, and more people need to get behind it. To be honest with you.
Yeah, and to piggyback what you said, I really want to start, inviting, parents to come volunteer and help us in the hallways, get that background check done, and come in and volunteer and get them in the hallways and chaperone and help us during passing periods and whatnot. Trish, Dr. Diamond, plan of action. What you got?
Thank you. I liked hearing that you were doing work also in Lake Washington School District because of the fact that our communities are really disjointed. And so the traditional idea that we're all located in urban centers, that's not the reality anymore. And those Black and Brown students are usually lost and overwhelmed. So that's great to hear. I think, well, really, I think the first step is we need to assist families. We have to realize that they're survivors of this system. They may have had negative educational experiences as well as trauma that are impacting their children that are in the school. So I think we shouldn't write people off and just think that, okay, we're going to just address K through 12, these students. No, we need to also address the parents because then parents can intervene or families can intervene and hold the schools more accountable for the education that they're providing their children so that they can become more involved and empowered. Hold the schools more accountable so they can be empowered, so aware of their rights and aware of their children's rights when they're in schools. There are occasional things that are problematic that occur in school, so that they can have those conversations with their children on what they're learning and what's occurring at the school, and empower them to advocate for themselves with our support. I think we also need to examine, of course, professional development, hiring practices in schools, honor the tenor of Brown v. Board in terms of the teachers, as well as ensuring that the attrition rate for Black and Brown and Indigenous educators is not so high as well. And providing wraparound services for students and still holding holding expectations high so that our students are empowered and can have the responsibility of changing the system in the future.
Thank you. Precious, what's up? What's your plan of action?
This was a very good conversation. Let me just say this, because I haven't been in school system in a while, so hearing a lot of this stuff, like, damn, ain't shit changed since last time I was there. But anyway, overall, like law enforcement, we have a very, very long way to go when it comes to education. As a matter of fact, I think the road is even longer with education compared to law enforcement. But I do feel with education, I think we got a little more control to resolve some of the issues that we are seeing compared to law enforcement. But let me also say, and I think it's already been said before, parents need to be more involved when it comes to not only their children academic, but also behavioral issues that they may be experiencing. Parents do not realize the power they truly have to change the game in terms of how school districts handle the students. Because I've seen it happen 3 times so far in my life where parents band together for issues that they saw in the schools and that has been changed. So it can work. But parents definitely would definitely have to want the same common goal. But of course, it takes some collaboration on that.
Yep.
So that's my goal. I hope parents just need to do more.
Tank Top Bob, take us away. Of course, he's muted.
I think everybody here is probably better versed on education than me. I did teach a high school class when I was in college at North Salem High School in Oregon. A school that was dominated by Hispanic families, people who had English as a second language, low income, etc. And what I learned there, and I think this applies to our conversation, is that education doesn't happen in a vacuum. These people do not just come to the school through a wormhole. They come to school from a home. And so, like so many other conversations, it always comes back to family. It comes back to what's happening in their homes. It comes back to hoping that there's something that we can do to support families so that students are coming to school not hungry, so that students are coming to school without emotional pain, so that students are coming to school without so much trauma in their lives that they have the triggers that obviously so many people do because of that trauma. I think that the prevention on that side is going to be the most effective thing for improving our education system, because it is difficult to imagine cleaning up everything all at once. But to that same point, as you mentioned over and over again, we're in a capitalist society, and wealth matters, right? So these gaps that people have in terms of income also have an impact. So we need to also look at our community and say, okay, if we have more, regardless of what the parents are made of, male, female, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But the homes that people are raising, if there's more income in those homes, they're more likely to be successful. And so for Black families in King County who continue to struggle in terms of wealth, we see how that plays out in education. So again, it always comes back to family for me. It always comes back to how can we make up for that? Because the one thing that I know about my job is that I'm constantly dealing with people who have been failed at every turn in society, and it started in school.
Mm-hmm.
And their report card ends up on your local DA's desk. End of sentence.
Talk about it.
Yeah, that it does come full circle like that. It is like that. We got to do a part 2 on this, man, because we got to get Alyssa on here. I don't know what happened. I got her on a couple of times, and then it kept dropping her off. But I wanted to hear that sister drop. So, hey, please share this video. Please join us in the comments. I'm gonna repost this and restream this again. But keep the comments going all throughout the week. Revisit this thread and whatnot, because this is conversations that we need to have. If you guys want to inbox me, if you have children in the schools, if y'all want some kind of advice and support, inbox Anthony, even inbox Bobby too, man. We need allies in the legal system.
Oh my
Inbox
God.
Dr. Diamond, inbox Precious. We all have experience, what I'm saying, in the educational field, and we really need to, what I'm saying, lean on each other, for advice and being advocates for each other. And that's one thing I really do appreciate, is when people do inbox me and DM me and say, can you give me some advice about what I need to do? And, what I'm saying, or how can I do this? Or can you mentor my child or stuff like that? So that's another thing we could talk about next episode when we do a part 2, is opening up mentorships. Start putting, what I'm saying, our money, and our walking where our talking is, you know what I mean? So we could be starting a mentorship, what I'm saying, as alternative education systems for, our people in need. All right. All right, man. Share this video. Check us out. We on here at least once a week. Love y'all. Peace, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hey, and the first 3 people to inbox me, I'm gonna give you a complimentary gift, for joining us tonight. So go ahead and inbox me. I got some soap, some incense. I got a variety of things for y'all. I'll send you something. Inbox me. Peace.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.